Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final live chat in our 2021 series about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships. My name is Vanessa Furtado, and I am a program manager for the fellowships. I will be your moderator for today's chat. The live chat series is an opportunity for you to ask fellows your questions. We hope that through these chats, you'll see how the fellowship can impact policy and transform your career. Before we begin, I want to highlight that there is closed captioning offered for today's session. Follow the link in the chat box to view the captioning. To put today's session in context, we have hosted one chat each month during this application season. We're so glad that you are here today, since this is the final session before the 2021 application closes. As you can see, each chat focused on a unique aspect of the fellowship experience and featured different fellows as panelists. Today, we'll focus on your questions about the application, interview, and placement process. A quick reminder that all STPF applications are due at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, November 1. This means that you do have plenty of time to apply and be considered for a position in the 2022-2023 fellowship class, which will also be our 50th class. These fellowships are an opportunity for doctoral level scientists and engineers to spend a year contributing their expertise to federal policy. They are a paid 1-year full-time commitment in Washington, D.C. And if any of you still have questions about whether you are eligible to apply or you're interested in an application overview, you can visit our application portal. The link will be in the chat box to learn the ins and outs of STPF eligibility and application. So now on to the purpose of today's chat, for you to ask fellows your questions. Please use the question box in your menu bar as shown here. And if you like, you can indicate the person or people to whom your question is directed. We'll get to as many questions as we can today, and we'll focus on the chat theme. And now I'm very happy to introduce to you our fellows. First, Dr. Tracy Wellington served 2 years as a fellow at the State Department in the Office of Weapons of Mass Destruction Terrorism. She is now a technical staff member and the program manager for the State Department's activities at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, where she works to translate scientific principles into policy and practice. Next, we have Dr. Hai Nguyen, who had 15 years of experience teaching physics before becoming a fellow with the U.S. Department of Defense for 2 years. Following his fellowship, Hai was hired into a position in the Pentagon in nuclear command, control, and communications future and cross-cutting integration in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He is also a liaison with the Office of Science and Technology of the President, also known as OSTP, in the White House. And finally, we have Dr. Marcia Fournier, and she is an entrepreneur with 20 years of experience leading teams in developing innovative healthcare products applying genomics and machine learning. Recently, she founded Dimension Science, a nonprofit organization dedicated to creating opportunities for inclusion of minorities in science. She is currently a second-year fellow with the Center for Biomedical Informatics and Information Technology at the National Institutes of Health. It's great to have you all here with us today, and thank you for being part of this conversation. So before I go into questions from the audience, I will kick it off with one. As you all know, today's chat is about the application, interview, and placement process. So looking back, what do you wish you had known before you applied to STPF? And Marcia, can we start with you?
Sure, yes. Well, one of the things I said here as a joke, but it's no joke, is I wish I knew how to speak in acronyms because there is a lot in all offices. Each office has their own acronyms, but I think I really was the fellowship is being exactly what I heard from other fellows before I applied. So I haven't been surprised a lot, but I think you should keep in mind is it's a learning experience. So the first year will be mostly learning, and at least in my experience, the first year was all about learning about my office, the culture, the language, as I said, and learning about the projects. And really the second year is being more an opportunity to go to production, if you will. So don't think you're gonna hit the ground running. I think a lot of fellows, when they come from their prior experience, they expect they will start a fellowship and accomplish a lot. You can accomplish a lot, but it will be at a different pace. So be patient and try to learn as much as you can. And you're going to have opportunity to accomplish a lot, but will not be in the first 6 months. And the last thing I'm going to say is don't be surprised actually in the first 6 months if you feel like a fly on the wall. It's exactly how we will feel in many of the meetings, but it's okay. It's about being patient and learning as much as you can.
Thank you. Tracy?
I would think of it in terms of the application process and as a fellow. In terms of the application process, one thing that I wish I knew before I applied is that the process is either 0 or 100%. You're either waiting to hear back or you're frantically preparing for interviews, doing the interviews, the memo, or the finalist interview. So the down times where you were just wondering, did I move on to the next step? Seemed like everything moves so slow. And then once they gave you the next assignment to prepare for, it seems as if you didn't have enough time. And so the process is I think it was one preparation for the actual job, that intensity, but then slow. It's very bureaucratic. And the next thing is in terms of as a fellow, I would say, and this might be very agency specific, but I was the scientist of all sciences in my office. So my background is physics. That's what I've done all my life. But in our office, we deal with chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, weapons related things. And they would come to me with chemistry questions and biology questions because I'm the science fellow in the office. So obviously, you know what this is. And so I got really skilled at Google, and also knowing who to contact when you don't know the answer. So that was a very interesting experience, but I learned a lot in that time because I was forced to go find the answer or find someone who knew the answer.
That was great. Thank you, Tracy. Hi.
So I'll answer that question in two parts. The first part would be, when you're outside before you get into the fellowship, you go through the interview process. And you're right, Tracy, in the interview process, almost like a trial by fire to see this is how you're going to be able to handle the intensity coming with the job. I guess from my academic background, I worked it up the ladder. On top of the ivory tower when I became chair of my department. I look across the landscape of academia, I see this is it. And so I guess in a way that motivated me to say, okay, maybe I don't know all of that I should know. Therefore, I should go ahead and apply for the sabbatical year to really deep dive into something I did not know anything about. So in a way, it was scary that, hey, I'm doing something completely new. Something I have no idea what's going on, and I don't want to speak the lingo, the acronym, right? And so I think it was scary, but rest assured that your skill set as scientists and engineers, that you're well trained for this kind of thing. And so before getting on the fellowship, I should have known that my skill set applied to all the things that I'm doing now. And so rest assured that you when you go down this path to become a fellow, that your skill set will come back and help you along the way. The second part is that once you get into the fellowship, just like Tracy, I was the physicist in-house, right? They will come to me with all kinds of questions. You're the guy who has all the answers. Oh, I don't. So let me go find my colleague. Let me dig around, find out what's going on. And so another thing is that I built confidence. It gets confidence in a way is that I was able to answer quick questions for them, and get to the answer really quick. And I was tasked as production productivity is overrated in a way that once you're productive, they give you more tasks to do. And so they say, okay, here's more challenging problem, here's more things to do. And so I realized quickly that my skill set in academia, again, helped me along the way that, okay, how do I manage this whole project? How do I manage this whole portfolio that now on my desk? And so even though I don't know a whole lot, I want to find out what the answer is. So the curiosity that you have as a scientist, trying to get to the bottom of things and trying to use scientific method to have some rigor in the things that you do comes back will help you along the way. And so, with all my projects that I'm handling now, every single one of those projects rely on my scientific skills and my kind of know-how and kind of go out there and go get it. You remember in the lab when you're trying to do something, you stay late at night, you work extra hard because you want to find out the answer, because you want to work towards your PhD and try to get your postdoc. That's the same set of mentality that you have to have in order to say, I'm going to try to solve problems. So as a problem solver, you will need it. As a scientist, they rely on you for science, your scientific skill set to put their solution on better ground, that they have a proven methodology to get to the answer. They like that.
That's great. And it's really interesting to hear you all kind of answer that with, though you had your expertise in your specific science, that it was almost your scientific training or education on how you learned to approach problems and get your answers that helped you in your role as a fellow when people came to you with science questions that were technically outside the scope of your scientific expertise, but you were able to use those analytical skills in that way. All right, well, thank you for that. I am now going to go to some questions from the audience. This is a question for any of you or all of you, if you'd all like to answer it. Would you think there was more to gain from being a fellow early in your career or after some post-PhD experience, say 5 to 10 years?
I can start if you want. So I'm a mid-career. When I applied to my fellowship, I already had 10 years of being CEO and a founder and CEO of a biotech company, developing a biotechnology product in the area of breast cancer. We were developing a molecular test to improve breast cancer treatments, and we took that technology from pretty much the bench to clinical approval, regulatory approval. And so it was a great time for me to apply for this fellowship. I know a lot of the fellows, their early career, they finish their postdocs and apply for fellowship. But in my case, actually, I came to the fellowship at the right time. So I think there is no right or wrong way of doing it, but I think have clear why you're doing it. And I think that is the main question. I would say is not necessarily the where you are in your career, but what are your goals, and have that clear goal in terms of your career goals, but also your interest in issues, specifically in policy issues. So I think that will be my advice in terms of stage of your career.
I would agree with Marcel completely. You have to think about your goals, the impact that you make, not necessarily when you're going to apply, right? So you might be fresh PhD coming out of graduate school, but if you have a particular thing that issues, policy that you're passionate about, and that you think contribution to make an impact in that, by all means do that right away, right? In my case, 10 years, 12 years ago, when I was first in Washington, D.C., I had the chance to hang out with the Jefferson Fellows at the State Department. in which I learned a lot about the impact they kind of make there. So at that time, I wanted to apply already, but I was going through my tenure, and so I was waiting until I got tenure. Then the time I got tenure, I became department head. So different responsibilities and different things pulled you different ways. I felt that there were things that I was passionate about, but it wasn't enough for me to take away from my academia world. And so not until 2018 when opportunity came up for me to take a sabbatical, then I said, okay, now it's time to go. Because if I don't take this sabbatical, then I will not be able to have time. Right? So for me, it was a matter of trying to synchronize my career with it. But really, I would advise future fellows that go ahead, apply, and do the things that you're passionate about, the things that you can make an impact on right away. I have the opportunity now to make an impact, right? So things that I'm doing now, it has national security impact in its own right, but I feel like I waited for too long because of my academic career. I put everything on hold. So once I determined that I've got top of the food chain in the academic world, I need to make a different set of impact. So that's why I applied.
I'll just quickly jump in to say that I did the fellowship a year out of getting my PhD. And for me, I knew that I was going to be on the so-called non-traditional career path. And policy was very interesting to me, especially international policy. And this was a very early way to find out if what I thought this would be or what I hope this would be is actually true. With that, if I needed to pivot, I wouldn't have been out too long, but I'd also have gotten some really useful experience. And so I agree that it literally depends on where you are at that point in time. I mean, you might be after you honed in on a certain topic for your PhD and maybe did a 1, 2 or so year postdoc and honed in, and you're interested in seeing something completely different. And they're not, the good thing about this fellowship is that you can do it at any stage in your career, which a lot of them say you have to be 2 or 3 years out of getting your degree or so on. And so that's the great opportunity that maybe applied. If it doesn't work out, that doesn't say 5 or so years from now you can't apply again or try it then. So it just depends on where you are, which allows you the freedom to apply now and see if it works out and if it's a good fit.
That's wonderful. Thank you all for those answers. And kind of a question specifically about your skill sets and kind of tailoring your CV and personal statement for the application process. A prospective applicant has asked a question for anyone. Hai mentioned that his fellowship projects benefited from his science skill sets. For all of the panelists, in the context of tailoring a CV and personal statement, which skills from your PhD most prominently translated to the fellowship? Which ones did you not use as much during this fellowship?
I'll jump in first. So my specific dissertation topic never came up in my 2 years being a fellow. No one was really interested in those specifics. But the fact, as I said, my office was the Office of Weapons of Mass Destruction Terrorism. And so a lot of what they did was international security kind of things. And I did a nuclear related dissertation. So that was helpful to generally say, okay, she knows a general concept in this space. But other than that, it was not specific to what my science was. I think what was helpful when I wrote my personal statement, I tried to look at the big picture of what was important about my dissertation. What was the big question? What was I trying to solve? What type of policy issue was I trying to answer? Because I mean, these projects get funded for a reason, and it's answering this big picture question. And it forced me to hone in outside of being a graduate student or a postdoc. Why was this important to do? And then I try to articulate that in my essay to say, you know, I'm interested in solving these problem solving and addressing these issues, and would like to look at it from a different perspective rather than as on the bench, you know, as where the policy is made. And so I tried to write my essay as taking a step back from what I did as a student, as a postdoc, and looking at it and say, why is this important? And how can this help society? And that's how I think it's very easy to get into the nitty-gritty of the details of your research and what you do, which is what you do is very important, but there's a big picture as to why it's important. And I think looking at that will help narrow down your personal statement.
Yeah, I would agree with Tracy on, for me, for instance, when I applied, I was so far away from my PhD. It was over 10 years after, actually 20 years after my PhD. So but what I say is your analytical skills, that is, I still apply what I learned in my PhD, which is being independent thinker and having analytical skills that you're going to use a lot in your fellowship. But as Tracy said, maybe not specifically the subject of your thesis, but in a more higher level way, higher level science. I think that my experience is still helpful to me.
I would agree with both what Masa and Tracy were saying. I often phrase it this way. That is, I have a delta function of knowledge, right? So my PhD was in magneto-optical trap recoil high momentum spectroscopy, which is a delta function of knowledge. Only a few people in the world know the thing that I did for my PhD. But you have to step back, take a look at a larger picture, larger narrative. Why did I do that project? What impact did it make? Oh, okay. Well, optical trap, which is first step of a Bose-Einstein condensate. Okay, this has application in larger picture quantum information, quantum science, things like that. Okay. Now, the larger picture was that I was able to collaborate with people on my fellowship office and connect with people in the quantum science industry from White House, right? So it's like it's really far removed. There's a steps in between, but I was singularly focused on my PhD alone and the things that I do research in my lab as a faculty member of the university. Then I lose that larger picture, right? I don't see all those dots connected, right? So I would not be able to perform or do things that I do in my office well, because I don't see a larger picture. What's the point of doing go to the bench, do all this stuff, right? So I would say that when you write your resume, your CV, think about a larger picture. What impact did it make, right? Don't think about, oh, this jargon that you get used to in graduate school that your graduate advisor kind of talking about. You have to see a larger picture. I think that should be.
Thank you. So another question from the audience is, do most of the fellows already have significant demonstrable policy experience? And what advice would you give to those who do not?
I think not necessarily. I think most of fellows don't have policy experience. I don't think it's, I didn't know I had, but I had a lot of policy experience after actually starting my fellowship. I found out that I have more policy experience than I underestimated myself, I think. But in different areas from what I'm working today. So I think that for the fellowship is if you don't have policy experience, it's totally fine. That is exactly why you would be doing the fellowship, is to learn about that. I think again, I go back to the question is, what are the issues you care about, and how these issues related to policy, and really thinking about the issues and the causes that you care about is more important than bringing a lot of policy experience for your fellowship, because you're going to have plenty of time to learn and opportunities to learn about policy.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I'm so sorry, Sai. I just wanted to ask if when you speak, if you could speak a little bit closer to your mic, because you're cutting out a little bit when you speak, and I want to make sure we don't lose anything that you say.
I was gonna say that I agree with that because it's a learning opportunity. It's a it's a professional development experience, right? So you might come in with no policy experience, none whatsoever, but your office, the host office, should then educate you, and your curiosity, you want to learn more. You want to engage with not only your office, but the agencies that associate with that, and then across the government. You might want to think about your own policy direction too. So even if you have blank, uh, policy experience, that might be a good thing because of all the policy wonk that's walking around Washington D.C. They're already, some of them set in their ways, and so they might have a preconceived notion of what things should be. Having you not having any policy experience might bring fresh views, and so that's all I got to say about that.
And there are certain things that you can only learn on the job. Different agencies have agency culture. So how things are done at State Department and what is the day-to-day might be different from highest experience at Defense. And those cultures affect even how you approach the policy that you do. And so I think that the best way to get the experience is to do programs like these, because you're coming in and, as I said, it is a professional development experience. You are contributing your knowledge, but you're expected to get things out of it too. And so I wouldn't be afraid if I think Marcia said that she knew more policy than she thought. And I think when you go in there, you realize that just even working in your day-to-day, if you're a student, your labs, if you are academia, you're dealing with academic policy and issues every day. If you're in entrepreneurship, you're dealing with it every day. It just looks different, but it's going to look different regardless of which agency you go to. But if there's one thing you can't know more than you need, is how to write clearly and succinctly. The memos will be passing through. How to convey what you're trying to say in as short a way as possible is very helpful. And that will get you through with any policy that needs to be written or done.
And if I may add one thing, is that the work of government is not all policy making, right? It is also a lot of project management, especially, for instance, at executive branch at NIH, for instance, a lot of our projects are project management. So also there is this aspect of policy that is not necessarily create a new policy or write a new policy, is implementing, and also when you at the government managing grants or contracts, is also a lot of part of the work is related to policy, but is not necessarily making new policy. So there is a lot of different ways you can work in policy, that even through project management.
Yeah, I would agree with the last point that Marcia raised, that the day-to-day thing, you're gonna have to know how to take out the trash. You're gonna have to know how to clean your desk. All kind, project management. You have to be able to do the dirty work, right? Before you can write that polished policies, which you owe to the secretary to sign off on, forward to Congress or something, or the president sign off. You have to be able to do all the dirty work and understand the impact in which the policy that you're creating. So you don't just simply go in there and start writing policy. There are seasoned professionals in there that help you out, but you start from the bottom. You learn your craft and you learn the collaboration and coordination across the agencies, across the government, so that you get things done. Because what is the point of making policy if you don't get things done?
Thank you all. Another question for any or all of you. In your application, how did you balance expressing interest for particular agencies/policy areas with openness to new experiences? Were you surprised by any of the agencies that were interested in interviewing you?
I didn't know that some of these offices, I might know the general agency, but I didn't know what some of the offices that wanted to interview me, what they actually did. And the nice thing I think about the interview for me was a lot of it was these offices introducing themselves to me. It was, this is what we do and this is how we saw you would be a good fit. And ironically, throughout my 2 years, I interacted with at least half of those offices after the fact, because a lot of what you do is interagency, working across agencies. I think how I dealt with my application so that I didn't know where specifically I wanted to end up. I was open in the process, was I highlighted my skills. So, we mentioned analytical. My experiences, I've had experience in the corporate world, in addition to in my academic science field. And so highlighted that I can adjust in different environments. So instead of taking my experience literally, I try to show how I can adapt into a new area, with new topics and so on. So my degree and my background obviously lends to, oh, she can do this, but I try to also articulate my skills and how I can contribute to just science policy across the US government. And I was also very open as to where I would land in the end.
Yes, it was similar to me. I didn't know, even though I had over 20 years in cancer research, I was very open. I was not seeking anything at NCI. I ended up placed at NCI, not surprising, but was surprising to me that 6 offices of NCI interviewed me. Because so if you're in cancer research, there is a demand for cancer researchers at NIH. I was surprised at how many offices reach out for interview. It seems there are not many fellows in oncology space that apply for the fellowship. But I was very open to where I would land on. But obviously being interviewed for at least 6 offices at NCI, I realized that was like a really good fit for me and my background. I ended up staying in oncology space. But I think in my application, I tried, as Tracy, highlight my experiences in terms of like different experiences I had and how I solved problems. And so I think this is what the offices will be looking is what are your skills, solving problem skills. And also I also had an industry experience. I think a lot of offices that interviewed me were very interested about the industry experience. But even if you don't have industry experience, try to highlight the different types of experience you had, and also how these like the differences, how you differentiate as a professional. I think that will be my advice, to try to highlight your differentiation.
Yeah, through my interviewing process, I don't know if you recall. I'm sure the two of you have same experience I did. Where we zigzag across DC, go to multiple different buildings and get clearances to go different buildings, different parts, and so I thought that was an amazing experience by itself. Just zigzagging DC, like angel and demons kind of going through DC finding clues. But really, once I get into those offices, I interview them. Is this the place that do I want to be? Is this the person that do I want to work with? Is this the policy area that I'm interested in? Right. And so I interview quite a lot with the National Science Foundation, probably because they moved the office from Boston all the way to near where I live. So commute time was a decision factor. But as it turns out, I knew that I didn't want to be in the National Science Foundation because of the things, the project that they wanted to be on, and I wasn't sure if I want to do that to make the impact there. So they offered me the position there, but I turned it down. The people that I work with now, the host office that ultimately offered me the fellowship and the job afterwards, I found that they were new group of people trying to do new things, and there's a lot of room to grow, and I see that as an opportunity that, hey, potentially if I do this fellowship well, they could hire me, right? But now keep in mind at the time I was chair of the physics department. I wanted to come back to academia, but I didn't want to close that door. And I said, okay, let me give this a shot, trying to find out what this is about, trying to learn on the job, and they offered me the job after my fellowship. So that's all.
That is a perfect transition to the next question I wanted to bring to you all. Was a prospective applicant asked, how do you stay engaged with policy after your fellowship, and what is your experience transitioning back to science, or do you?
That's the first question. I never transitioned away from science or back to science. The assumption is that, oh, if I do this policy, I don't do science anymore. That's wrong. The another thing is, you are a scientist. You will always be a scientist. If you're thinking science happened at the bench top or just in the lab, then you really are wrong, and you don't see that larger picture, right? Because now your scientific skill, you can be very useful for making policy, and the policy in which you make will impact the science that you do. And so the two are married together. So you can never say that, oh, I take a year away from science and come back to science, or come back to the academia world. That is academia's center, right? So you got to step away from that.
I agree with that 100%. I was always the scientist in a meeting. And at the Department of State, they're such accomplished people in foreign affairs that I wouldn't even pretend to have as much skill set. My expertise in the room was the technical expertise, and I actually wanted it to be that way. My current role is in part because of my fellowship. So I am program manager for the laboratory's engagement with the State Department. And so my experience at the State Department and the network formed there was the reason in which I could go back to National Lab and manage that portfolio, because it's really hard to do when you've never had that experience at an agency. And my next step after this would be the portfolio that I did at the State Department. I will be doing it in a few weeks at another agency. And so that portfolio, the first time I ever did it or technically heard about it was when I did my interview for my fellowship. And now it's such a tight-knit niche community that I'm able, even after leaving the Department of State and going to the lab, was able to use different aspects of my fellowship in an entirely different environment. Instead of being the policymaker, I was the implementer. And so it was interesting to see it from both sides and experience that, and now leveraging those experiences to going back on the policymaking side. So you never truly leave it. There's always ways to get connected. You still have your scientific community. So if you used to engage in conferences or so on, there's no reason to stop, because you need to keep abreast in order to help guide that policy making.
Thank you. So going back to the interview process, can each of you share what your interview and finalist processes were like, and how did you prepare?
Well, I can start with that. So for my interview, what I really worked well for me was that I had a set of questions that I asked all officers I interviewed with, and the same set of questions. And I had some specific questions for the officers as well, but I kind of had like 5 questions that I asked to everybody, and that helped me in the end to decide what the opportunities I like the most. And these questions were based pretty much on what was important to me. So I think, like, for you guys out there, find out what is important for you. But for me, for instance, I ask about what would be the size of the office, the culture. And then one question that helped me was the question if the office was more polished or more project management type of projects. And I also asked, like, for me, it was important if it was like a more independent work or teamwork, as I really like teamwork. I didn't want to be isolated, so is it something that was important to understand how the office worked. And so these are kind of some examples of questions I've done on my, and I asked those questions that were really important to me to every single office. And in the end, that really helped me, because I had, after many interviews, you're not going to remember the first interview, so take notes. And also make sure you follow up right after your interviews. I think the next 24 hours will help you to remember, because in the end of the week, you may not remember the first interview you had. My year was different because I didn't have to go from office to office like, hey, I was in a Zoom, so I had some time between the interviews that I was not running across the city. That was refreshing. So if you guys will have remote interviews, take advantage of that, like off time that you have between the interviews. So I think these were the things that helped me. Was really helpful to have these 5 questions, because there's a way for me to remember each of the offices really well based on the responses of that set of questions.
Yeah. Okay, so 2 parts to this question. First part is when I interview, they they gave me this package about AI, artificial intelligence, and I wrote a 1-page memo and a slide deck to go with it in terms of artificial intelligence, AI, and I add another AI. So AI in artificial intelligence and application and implication, right? And 3 weeks ago. The secretary used the memo that I wrote long ago for my fellowship, and so that was the impact, and I want to share that story. But another thing is like from the inside, the last 2 years I've been trying to interview a lot of candidates for the fellowship, right? And it struck me that it was kind of I guess because lack of experience in interviewing people. I guess because uh, uh, as a seasoned professional who I interview a lot of faculty members for jobs all the time, right? I interview people for tenured faculty position at my university all the time. And so when I interview people for the fellowship, uh, the problem I see is that people go back to what they know, right? So, oh, in my PhD I did this, and all of a sudden I hear jargon coming out, right? So as a physicist, I know physics. I have delta functional knowledge. I do not know chemistry or biology. And so for me to kind of grab as much as I can, learning what the candidate is saying to me, telling me what their skill sets are, I was completely at loss. And just imagine me as physicist not understanding what you do, and just imagine the people who are not scientific background, they will be completely even lost, right? And so I think when you interview, make sure that don't spill out jargon. Think about a larger picture, how that made the impact, and relate to the people that you were talking to, right? Say, okay, you have to find out, do some quick research about them, and say, okay, who are these people, what they care about, talk about their mission set, right? What question they're trying to answer, so you can place yourself in their position as opposed to trying to tell them what you're about. You know what I mean?
Just quickly, my semifinalist interview was, and that's when you had the track. So I was diplomacy. Other than my briefing paper and the quick slides, most of my interview was non-scientific. And so, and not necessarily policy, but it was questions like, if you had the ear of the science advisor to the president or the OSTP or so on, what big issue would you ask them, want them to know? You had like an elevator ride, that kind of question. And so there were two ways for me to go. There's always the big topic of the day, the buzzword topic and so on. And then there's what you're interested in. It might not be what you did research on, but this is the side passion of yours or something that you're interested in. Luckily, on the spot, I went with what I was interested in, because 4 questions down the line, somebody came up again to follow up on what I spoke about. And if it was a hot topic of the day, after a while, the buzzwords that you see in the news or in the paper would have gone, and you would have nothing to talk about. Truly talk about what you're interested in. Like the semifinalist interviews over video, but your passion can convey over video. And if they see that you're passionate about this, it really helps maybe a stressful interview, because I had 9 people on video. Like we were doing pandemic style interviewing from then, because you open up the screen and there are 9 people ready to ask you questions. But find that thing that you're interested in and share it, because every day you'll be working on something that somehow you're surprised that you would have to work on, and being able to like pivot is very helpful. And that interview was just a lot of pivoting. And so if you stick to what you're interested in and convey it, as Hai said, clearly it shows that you have thought about what you do when you can talk about it outside of the jargons. And that is, I think, would be what you'd want to convey.
And Vanessa, if I can add something, is one thing that I learned right before my interviews, which was great, and I want to share with you guys, is that most of the years, actually, the offices are competing for you. So it's different from interviewing for a regular job. So actually, you want to interview the offices and pick the best offices that will like offer you the opportunity of training and learning and that causes that you care about, right? So remember that when you're interviewing. Are you guys listening? My computer, I think it's going a little crazy with
We can hear you.
emails coming, like notifications. You're not hearing, right?
We can hear you.
Good. So then, like, remember that they're competing for you, not the other way around. So also take the time to learn a lot about the offices, because there will not be a lot of opportunities to talk to them between your interview week. Actually, you won't talk to them until you have to make a decision. So take that time to learn as much as you can about the office and you interviewing them. And also, I think that be comfortable. The other thing I learned was during the interview process is you have to be willing. This is a public service, right? So you have to be willing to do this small job as well. And that is something that you may take an opportunity in the interviews to communicate. Is like government is big. Most likely your work will not be just you. It's different from you as scientists. You have your first name on the publications. For government job is a lot more like a teamwork. There are no names that will go like as very rare, right? That there will be a name. So also be aware of that, and comfortable with that. And if you're comfortable, like talk about that during the interview, because I think it's a skill that you want to highlight.
Yeah, I would follow what Martha just said there. When you publish your scientific paper, your name go first, your faculty advisor go last, all that, right? And so you count the number of publications and you think that you're making an impact. Okay, that's one way to make an impact, right? But another thing is, when you see your words in a certain memo where the president signed, or you see your words where the secretary signed, now that's impact.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing lots of your thoughts and experiences, both through the semi-finalist interview process and the finalist interview process. And I just wanted to give a quick note of the context in which we're living in with COVID, that as Hai had mentioned, this is a DC-based fellowship, it still is, and before COVID, the finalist interviews were done in person, where people would come to DC and go from office to office. The semi-finalist interviews, as Tracy noticed, were always virtual. And then we've shifted to a virtual format during the pandemic in order to keep everyone safe. And I know we've mentioned in previous chat sessions that, we will keep all applicants and candidates and finalists aware of where we are in the returning to in-person work as we know more. So our priority is always to keep everybody safe. And we have now at this point reached almost the top of the hour. And so I have one final question that I am going to ask each of our panelists. And what is one thing everybody should do before hitting submit on their application?
I'll go first. Have confidence that you're going to make an impact. So that the thing that you wrote, the thing that you thought about, and now's the opportunity to hit that submit button to make an impact.
I can go.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, prepare the application like this is what you're going to do next year. I think sometimes when we do application process, we are competing with some imaginary other applicant there and trying to be better than them. But I think for this fellowship, one of the interesting things is that you just need to prove that you would excel in this fellowship. What are you bringing to the table, regardless of whoever else is applying? So, because the government is so big and needs a wide array of experiences, you want to show them that your experience is valuable. So think about your application process like that and approach it like this this is where you'll be contributing next year, regardless of if it works out or not. Before you click submit, make sure that you have conveyed that the expertise that I've gathered over my short or very long experience can contribute to addressing science policy issues in this way.
Yeah, and I agree with both Tracy and Hay. And what I would add is make sure someone else reads your application, not your husband or your kid, but someone that can give you honest feedback, and then press that button.
Well, Tracy, Marcia, and Hai, thank you all so much for sharing your experiences and wisdom and your time with us today. And to all of our attendees, thank you so much for participating in today's chat and asking such great questions. We hope you all feel prepared to submit your applications by November 1st. We will send a recording of this conversation in the coming days, along with resources to support your STPF application. And if we could not get to your question today, please email us at fellowships@AAAS.org, as seen on your screen, to continue the conversation there. So enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.